Welcome to Candlewick Library. I'm Cheryl. Today I'm doing a review and a discussion of a lot of the key themes of The House of My Mother by Shari Franke. This is a very new release. It just came out, I believe, this month. I wasn't sure how long it would take me to read it and if I would even get to it this month, but once I picked it up, I couldn't put it down. Originally, the plan was this would just be in my normal review of the books I read in January, but there were so many things in this book that led me down little trails of thought, and I took so many notes while reading it and marked so many places in this book that I knew that I needed to come at this in a different way than just a regular review. I will do a short little review real quick of what I thought of this book, and then I'm going to go into a deeper discussion mentioning a lot of the things that she talks about in this book, but also why they matter to not just family vloggers, but to everybody. And some of the things that I think are really important to understand about how this kind of thing happens in a community that a lot of people wouldn't think that things like this would happen. There will be spoilers, but I was spoiled on some of these same things before I read it, and it did not impact my reading of the book. So if you don't want to hear anything in the book before you read it, then after I review it, then you could stop the video. But if you really don't mind the spoilers and you're trying to decide whether you want to read the book or not, I don't think that you will be spoiled in a way that will make it a negative experience for you. Because so many people are familiar with her story anyway, I think you go into it with a certain amount of spoilers anyway. So if you don't know what this book is about, the writer, Shari Franke, is the eldest daughter of the Franke family. The Frankes were an LDS, or otherwise known as Mormon, family on YouTube that shared their daily life. They had 6 children. Their YouTube channel was called 8 Passengers. Like most family vloggers, everything about their life was on YouTube. They shared everything. The embarrassing things, the sad things, the bad things, the good things. So at a certain point, a lot of people started to really look at Ruby Franke, the mother, and start talking negatively about some of the things that she had on the videos of her parenting. A couple of years ago, it was found out that she and another woman named Jodi Hildebrandt had the 2 youngest children at Jodi's house in Ivins in southern Utah, and that these 2 children were being abused, I would say tortured, and they are both in jail now. So this is Shari's story of their family life and how a lot of people are saying, oh, Jodi Hildebrandt did this to Ruby Franke. And while some of that is true, Shari is telling us about what her mom was like even before Jodi came into the picture and sharing a lot about her own life. Of the 6 siblings, Shari only talks about herself and Chad, who is the second child and the oldest son. And the reason that she talks about him is that some of the big key themes have to do with him. Also, he is an adult now. According to him, she sent him all of the parts about him in this book before publishing to make sure that he was okay with it, and he gave her the green light on everything about him in this book. Other than that, she mentions a few things that happened to some of the siblings, but she never says their names, even the ones that everybody knows because they either saw it on a vlog or because they were the ones that were abused at the end that we found out about. And she does that because she doesn't want to keep doing what has been done to them their whole life, where their life is on display for everybody, whether they have a say in it or not. It is a very well-written book. It's very compelling. I felt the whole time like it was her writing and that she's a really good writer. But at the end, in the acknowledgments, it does say, I'm forever grateful to Caroline Ryder, my writing collaborator, for putting to words the raw emotions and dialogue I've held close to my heart for years. So I don't know if that means that that person was a ghostwriter for her or just helped her with some of it. I'm not sure. But either way, it is well written, and she does not go into too much detail about any of the abuse. Some of it is more than others, but the abuse at the end that is pretty horrific is not detailed in this. So if you have trouble with those kind of details, you're not really going to encounter that in this book. I think that this book is worth a read. I think, like I said, it is really good. Even if you don't know who they are, it is an interesting book and really does bring up a lot of important topics. And I do think also that when there is a child whose mother has made millions of dollars off of content of her life without her really having a say in it, and now that she's an adult, she can get something back for telling the story, I think it is important to support her. So I would say that if you're at all interested in this, it would be great to support Shari Franke in either, checking it out at the library so that they get interest, or buying the book yourself. I've heard that the audiobook is really well done and she is the one reading it. So my review is that I highly recommend this book. So now I'm going to go through the book. I am going to read out certain parts of it the way I usually do when I do an in-depth review. And I'm going to talk about some of the themes that I feel like are really important to know and to notice in this book. The book starts with an introduction, and then it is organized by different parts. In the introduction, she starts at the end, August 30th, 2023, and this is the day she gets a call from the neighbors, because after she left home, a lot of the neighbors would keep her kind of in the know about what was going on, and they would alert her when things were happening, and they alerted her that the SWAT team was at her house. And so at this part is when she shows up at her home, and she is terrified, wondering what's happened, are her siblings okay? And she ends up taking a picture of the house after the police officers have broken into the door of the house, and she uploads it to Instagram with the word "finally." And she says, upload to Instagram, share. This nightmare was born on social media. It should die there too. I thought that was a really interesting way to start the book, because she knows that most of the people reading this book are going to know the end at the beginning. And so she starts there and explains why she would, in that moment, take the time to put a picture on Instagram. One of the reasons that I'm interested in this story is that I had red flags about Ruby Franke from the very first time I watched her. I remember when the Frankes were becoming a really well-known vlogger family, and I watched a few family vloggers, but not religiously. I never was really that into watching vlogs, and I turned on one of her videos, and there was just something about Ruby that really bothered me right from the beginning. I felt like she's not a very nice person. I don't like the way she talks to her kids. Family vlogging in general, most of the people that even the ones I did watch, I always felt like there was a level of fakeness to them. I just didn't enjoy it very much. But then I watched another video of hers, and it is one that has become famous, where she is talking about how her youngest daughter had forgot to pack her lunch for school, and Ruby did not go and take her a lunch and didn't want the teachers to give her any food. While I understood the idea behind it, where if you give your kids a job and they don't do it, that they are responsible for the consequences, it really struck me that this was the attitude with a 5-year-old. This was a kindergartner. While maybe not abusive in that moment, it felt that way a little to me, and it really turned me off, and I had no interest in them after that. And that told me right away that I did not like this woman and that I thought she was mean. So that was kind of my background with the Franke family in general. I knew who they were. I would see her pop up occasionally on things, and so she was in the background. I also had a few connections because, of course, back then I was still Mormon, and they were a Mormon family, like a lot of people on social media are, and a lot of the family vloggers. Also, they lived in Springville, Utah, which is where my father grew up. And so I have a lot of connections with Springville, and I have spent a lot of time in Springville. I immediately felt a connection to the story when it was starting to break. In the book, she goes to part 1, The Garden of Earthly Delights. The first chapter, Sealed, starts out in a way that to me is just so depressing. She's talking about how she had this reoccurring dream of going to heaven, and she's feeling joy and peace, and then she sees her mother's cold eyes. And it says, suddenly God's voice booms around me, shaking the very foundation of heaven. My child, you were wrong to defy your mother. I jolt awake, heart pounding, and for a moment the terror lingers. Even in the afterlife will I never be free of her. And the reason this stood out to me was just because I found it so heartbreaking that would be her idea of heaven, what would happen in heaven in her dreams. But also I wanted to mark it because later on in the book, I will come back to an idea of heaven, kind of what her viewpoint of heaven is. And I think that is an interesting thing to think about. On the very next page, she starts talking about her mom's history and how she grew up. She said that Ruby's family, that life revolved around scripture study, clean living, and above all else, family. That is, after all, the cornerstone of our faith. And when I read that, I stopped for a second and thought, no, actually, it's not. It's not a cornerstone of our faith. And I was thinking the Book of Mormon was considered the cornerstone of the faith. But then I remembered, no, they call it the keystone. The Book of Mormon is the keystone of our religion. That is something that Joseph Smith said. And so I looked it up because I wanted to see what on the church website right now, if you went to it, what is the cornerstone of the LDS faith? Is she right that it's family? Because I think that is what most members and people on the outside would think. Family is very important to Mormons. And so I looked it up, and a cornerstone is, the first stone that is laid in the foundation of a building. There's a lot of symbolism to cornerstones with the LDS Church. When they build a new temple, there's a ceremony when they lay the first cornerstone of the temple. And so I looked it up, and on the website it says that the cornerstone is Jesus Christ because he is the firstborn of all of God's children, because of course the LDS belief is that everyone is God's children literally, and Jesus Christ would be one of those. He would be our literal brother, and that he unites, aligns, and strengthens us. All things that a cornerstone would do. That's good. But that there are actually 4 essential cornerstones to the LDS Church that are absolutely, and this is a quote, absolutely fundamental to this work, the very foundation anchors on which the church stands. That is from their website. And so the chief cornerstone is Jesus. The second cornerstone is the vision given to Joseph Smith, his first vision, which they say is essential, without which the church could not be fitly framed together, which is interesting because there's been some controversy about the first vision over the last few years when it has finally come out that there is more than one account that are different from each other. And now the church is trying to pretend like we all knew about it all the time. But one of the prophets actually ripped one out of a journal and taped it back in later on because they were trying to hide it. I have an entire video about that if you want to go watch it. The third cornerstone is the Book of Mormon, and the fourth is the priesthood. And Gordon B. Hinckley, who is a prophet of the LDS Church, said, each connected by a foundation of apostles and prophets. So, according to the LDS Church website, the cornerstones and foundation of the LDS Church are Jesus, the first vision to Joseph Smith, the Book of Mormon, and the priesthood. And the foundation is then the apostles and prophets that bring all of those 4 things together. So the family is not found among those. However, I think with the members, family would be considered one of the 4 cornerstones. That also shows what I have talked about before on here, that as a member, you don't often fully align with the church, even when you think you do. Family is talked about in the church at General Conference when all of the apostles speak to us. It is talked about as if it is the most important thing. Everything we do is so that we can be with our families forever. That is kind of what's held over your head. If you don't do what you're supposed to do, if you don't go to church, if you don't pay your tithing, if you don't have your callings, if you can't go to the temple and get a temple recommend, and you don't do the work for your family, and you don't do your own work, and you don't get your children there doing their work, then none of you are going to be together. It seems like the most important thing. Some of the good things that I will say are positive about the LDS Church are the emphasis on family. Family home evening, where we were all encouraged on Monday nights to set aside that one night a week where we came together and did something as a family. However, in the everyday life of LDS people, you will find that some of the members that are the most religious don't spend as much time with their families because they are so busy with their callings. Their Sundays, they're at church all day in meetings. During the week, they have callings that take them away from home. I think that they put an emphasis on the family, but in reality, they say it, but they don't do it. That also applies to the fact that some people, when they leave the faith, are shunned by family. I have lost family members that won't talk to me anymore or will only talk to me if they have to. And the weddings, if you have a family member who is getting married in the temple and you are not LDS, or if you are one but you're not worthy of getting a temple recommend, which can be something as small as not being able to say that you sustain the church leaders or Joseph Smith, or not being able to pay your tithing, you will not be able to get a temple recommend. So you can't have all your family together at your wedding. At my wedding, I didn't have a single sibling there because at the time, none of my siblings were able to be in the temple. 2 of my 3 siblings now are very, very active. But at the time, I didn't have a single sibling there. It's sad to think about that, but it's also sad to think about that felt normal. As she goes on talking about her mom, she said that as soon as her mom turned 18, her race toward eternal exaltation began. My mother embarked on her mission to populate not just her earthly home, but her heavenly mansion as well. My background just changed a teeny bit because I had to move over a little bit. The light was coming in the window right on my face. So if you notice the background change a couple of inches, you were not wrong. That is a very normal LDS thing. You turn 18, it's time to get married and it's time to have children. And also when it says populate her heavenly mansion as well, the doctrine is that you have children here on earth, but that also when you are sealed, then when you are exalted into the celestial kingdom, you continue to have babies there. That also can be for people here that don't have children while they're on earth, that they look forward to when they can have children later. It talks about how she made a color-coded vision board of what she required in a future husband. 5 inches taller than me, handsome, car paid off, and engineer. This was funny to me because I had multiple times in Young Women's where we did this. And Young Women's is the organization in the LDS Church that is for teenage girls. It used to be age 12 to 18. Now I think that as the year that you turn 12, I think you go in. We did this multiple times, and most of the time it was not a list that said honest, loyal, kind, good with children. I'm sure there were a lot of girls that wrote those things, but most of the time my friends and I, our lists were returned missionary, holds the priesthood, has a temple recommend, because those were the things that we were being taught were the most important thing to look for in a husband. It's funny to me that she has looks and car paid off and his job. That was something that used to stick out to me when I would see those lists, is that a lot of times they were very shallow. And I looked for my lists that I wrote back then. I could not find them, so I can't share that. But that is a very normal thing. It might be across the board for people to do that. I don't know if that's just an LDS thing. But then it talks about a time when Ruby and Kevin were on a date and he was holding hands with her, and he looked over and noticed that she was also holding hands with another boy. And that made him mad, and he laid down the law, no more hand holding with other guys. And so from then on, they were, exclusive. And this stuck out to me for one reason, because it's written as if it's a weird thing. But I did that once. There was a time when I was holding two boys' hands at once. There was a lot of that when I was a teenager. And my friends and I, we dated a lot. We dated a lot of guys all at the same time. I only had 2 exclusive boyfriends in high school, and the rest of the time I was just dating multiple people at the same time. And we were encouraged to do that. It was encouraged because then we wouldn't get too attached to one person before the boy could go on his mission. And so I don't know if that was what was happening with her, but I think a lot of people would see that and think of that as this really negative, crazy thing. And I mean, it is, but in our culture, it was completely normal. I don't know what it's like now for LDS kids now, but in the 90s, that was normal. I knew girls that were different than that and that just had one serious boyfriend after another, or one the whole time. But most of the girls I knew were either not dating at all or were dating a lot of different people at the same time. And she talks about with her parents in particular, it was only 2 weeks from the moment they met until when they got engaged. And then they were married less than 3 months, or barely 3 months after their first meeting. That is also very normal in the Mormon culture. I have a brother and sister-in-law who were engaged after 2 weeks, and they were married a couple months later as well. Short engagements are very common. Doug and I were engaged for 4 months. We are very encouraged in the Mormon church to have very short engagements. That may seem like it's just Ruby and Kevin, but that is very Mormon culture. In the next chapter, there's one paragraph I wanted to share. She said, "I can't help but feel sadness for the baby girl who cried for her mother." She's thinking about herself when she was a baby, who wanted a different kind of love than the kind she received. A love that allows for vulnerability, for tears, for the full range of human emotion. A love that allows the child the freedom to feel. And this is going to be very important as we go through the book. One of her themes of not being able to ever feel like she was fully loved by her mom. It's just so sad. The next chapter, the title itself tells you that Mommy isn't very nice to me. They continue to have children, and she said that in 2005, when she was 2, Chad was born. The brother that is the only other sibling mentioned by name in the book. And then she goes through the continuing of more children. And she starts talking about blogging. Her mom decided to start a blog on Blogger. This also stuck out to me because I think this is one of the biggest themes of this family vlogger story and any of the other ones that you'll encounter. She writes, "In my church, we're encouraged to document our lives meticulously, creating a roadmap for future generations to understand their roots, and it seems as though the internet was just an extension of that, another way in which to do the Lord's work." I also had a blog. When my oldest was very little, I was at church one time, and one of the women there asked me if I had a blog yet. And I said, "What's a blog?" And she explained to me, and I found out that most of the girls my age at church had blogs. And since a lot of us lived away from our families, because I was in Wisconsin at the time, it was a way to keep your family up to date on what was happening in your family, to share pictures and stories. And so I immediately wanted to do that. I was away from all of my family and all of Doug's family. And so I started a blog also on Blogger. This is one of the other themes I wanted to stop and discuss for a few minutes, because this is something, like she said, that is huge in the Mormon church. Many of you will have noticed that a lot of the influencers on Instagram, a lot of the family vloggers are all Mormon. And it is because we are encouraged to do these kind of things. And this started with journaling. I want to talk about that for a second. The social media presence of Mormons and why. There she says how we are encouraged to document our lives meticulously. Later on page 35, she also talks about journaling, because she has kept a lot of journals, which is part of the reason that she has such good records for this book. It says, record keeping is deeply ingrained in the LDS faith. It's a sacred duty, a way of bearing witness to God's hand in our daily lives. We are taught that our personal histories will serve as testaments for future generations, spiritual roadmaps guiding our descendants through their own mortal journeys. And her mom said, my main goal for this blog is to journal our family's growth and experience. And this is how they started. They didn't start with the YouTube channel. It was with the blog. So with journals, I know a lot of people keep journals. This month, I'm doing Epistolary January, and I'm reading books that are journal entries. So this is not just a Mormon thing. However, in the Mormon church, we are encouraged to keep journals. These are all of mine from my teenage years. Most of these were bought at church stores. And at the beginning, they have a genealogy chart because they want you to know when you're going into it that you need to be remembering those who came before you. And then a lot of times we are writing to our posterity. For example, I did not write my journals, Dear Diary, and have it just be my feelings, as if no one would ever read it. I knew that someday someone was going to read it. My children, my grandchildren, my great-grandchildren were going to read these journals. And it was my responsibility to make sure that while I was telling what was happening in my life, that I also needed to be bearing my testimony to them. I would edit myself. My journals do not have every detail of what I was thinking and feeling and everything I did, because I didn't want, there were things I wouldn't want my grandkids, great-grandkids, great-great-grandkids to know. My job is to be a source of faith for them so that if they ever question the church, they can come to me and they can see my testimony. When I read my journals, they're actually excruciatingly embarrassing. I did write down a lot of my feelings and the silly things I thought about and did, but I also did do the testimony thing, and I know from things that I can remember, I know, oh, I just did not tell the whole story there. So journals are a little bit different for us. But like I said, we are taught from a very young age to keep them. And in fact, that our journals are like scriptures. President Kimball, who was an earlier prophet of the church, said, this is in one of my journals. I wrote down these quotes from him. What could you do better for your children and your children's children than to record the story of your life? Get a notebook, my young folks, a journal that will last through all time. And maybe the angels may quote from it for eternity. Begin today and write in it your goings and comings, your deeper thoughts, your achievements and your failures, your associations and your triumphs, your impressions and your testimonies. We hope you will do this, our brothers and sisters, for this is what the Lord has commanded, and those who keep a personal journal are more likely to keep the Lord in remembrance in their daily lives. I think that quote illustrates that we feel like it's a commandment for us to share. Recently, I was actually thinking about making a video about journaling, and so this stuck out to me so much when I was reading the book, because I think it's interesting how we see there are so many Mormon authors. I have so many Mormon authors on these shelves. Richard Paul Evans, Stephen R. Covey, Brandon Mull, Brandon Sanderson, Shannon Hell, Stephanie Meyer, Annette K. Larson, Jennifer Nielsen, Chad Morris, Joanna Barker, Jessica Day George, James Dashner, Nancy Campbell Allen, the Tuttle Twin books, if you have any of those, Orson Scott Card. They do like the books that are the fairy tale retellings where there's Joanna Barker, there's Megan Walker, Heidi Kimball, Sally Britton. I know all of them are, except for Megan. I'm not 100% sure, but I'm pretty sure she is. Allie Condi, Julie Wright. Pretty much if it says Shadow Mountain or the Shadow Mountain proper romances, that they're going to be a Mormon author. A lot of the Mormon authors tend to be in either the Regency romance or clean romance, or they are fantasy. These are people that I have on my shelves, and then there's a lot that I don't have on my shelves. I've often thought, what is it about the LDS Church that there are so many big names that are authors? And I think it stems back to this. I think it comes back to us journaling most of our lives, and that so many of us do it because we believe it's a commandment. The more you journal, the more you write, the more experience you're getting, the better a writer you're going to be. And so once blogging started, it really was the normal extension to our journal writing. And I haven't been as good at my journal writing since social media started. But Blogger was where we started first. And when people say, well, the church doesn't encourage us to do this stuff, they do. Elder David Bednar, who is one of the 12 apostles right now, he encouraged everybody to use social media to spread the gospel of Jesus Christ, sweep the earth as with a flood. The light that will be associated with the messages that come from authentic disciples of the Lord Jesus Christ will become ever more attractive in a world where people will use these tools to enhance the darkness. We thank thee, O God, for the prophets who have taught and prepared us for this time in which we live, who have urged us to use technological advancement to support the ongoing mission of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Latter-day Saints live a distinctive lifestyle that some people find interesting. Just live the gospel, let some of that be in your social media posts, and it will create a curiosity. Using social media as a Mormon is an extension of our missionary work. Every member a missionary. The problem came with the fact that we had no idea of the dangers. We were very naive. I was so naive. When I started my blog, it was public. I had pictures of my children just doing everything. I shared everything that we were doing. I wouldn't have shared some embarrassing things, but I mean, I was sharing a lot because it was my family that I was thinking of when I wrote those posts. And I think I had the outside of our house in Wisconsin on my blog sometimes. And I never thought about who was looking at it because I just assumed it was only other moms and family that were all innocent. That sounds so stupid to say, but that was how I felt. And that's probably how a lot of my friends felt that also had blogs. So when we moved to Utah, I kept blogging for a little while, but then once Instagram started, I kind of went over on there. And then on Instagram, it was the same way. I didn't think about the safety. I was posting pictures of my kids. I wasn't thinking about it too much, talking about where we lived. It wasn't until I started noticing that there were weird men that followed me and I had to block them that I started thinking about the safety. At that point, I went private on Instagram. And now I don't even use that account anymore. I only have my Candlewick Library account and I don't put my kids' faces on it. My daughters are 15 and 19. They were told that they couldn't have social media until they were 16. Neither one of them are interested in it. I've told them now that at the ages that they're at, if they wanted to ever be on one of my YouTube videos to talk about books, they could if they wanted to, but I won't ever have them on here or on pictures on my Instagram unless they expressly give me permission to show their face or if they want to talk, even at the ages that they're at, because there's a lot of scary things out there. And so when family vloggers started making these videos and they're putting out where they live, they're showing their kids have become their content, not just a background of their own videos or showing up occasionally, but their kids are the content. There's so many dangers to it, but a lot of them aren't going to think about that because one, it is a great source of income, and two, it is a way to grow the church. And so they would feel like they are meant to do it. The apostles have told them to do it. I should clarify, they haven't told them vlog your families, but I have been in meetings before and I have heard people say that show people a happy family. Show them what your family does and how different you are and how great you are. Even in homeschooling world, when I did The Good and the Beautiful, I went to a convention once and Jenny Phillips told us to make sure we were putting all of our homeschooling online on our social media, but only to show the good parts, because we want that level of perfection that we put on ourselves in the church. We want that to be what people see, because then what we have looks attractive. So with her, she was using it as a way to show, hey, everybody should homeschool because it's so positive. I remember at the time, even loving The Good and the Beautiful and still being Mormon at the time, I felt like that was wrong because that wouldn't help me to only see positive homeschooling experiences only. I'm not one of those people that thinks you should put up every single bad thing that ever happens. I'm not going to put up embarrassing things about my kids or anything like that, but I'm not going to pretend like it's perfect. But that was kind of the idea of that. And that is the idea with Mormon stuff too, is only show people the perfection, the happiness, all of those things, because then people will want what we have. So that is why I think so many Mormon people have fallen into vlogging and other social media influencer type of areas, and why you see that they usually come across a certain way. Later on in the book, she says, in many ways, family vlogging is a very LDS-aligned pursuit, a natural extension of our traditional practices. Vlogging offers a modern form of bearing testimony and keeping personal and family records, while simultaneously engaging in passive missionary work. Vlogs mean church members can share their faith, values, and daily lives with a global audience, potentially attracting interest into the church and its teachings. The Frankes, there was always something a little bit different that was showing up that people were starting to notice. When I wrote all those notes from this chapter, from chapter 3, later on there'd be at least 2 times when Shari would also mention what I was saying. And this is from an active LDS girl. She is still a Mormon, and yet she is also admitting that this is a very LDS aligned thing. When I was talking about how she never felt like her mom loved her, she also says no child should ever have to earn a parent's affection, and no amount of achievement can ever fill the void where unconditional love should be. In that very next chapter, she talks about how her mom got these pajamas from her grandmother when she had a baby, and Shari wanted some and asked if she would be able to have some someday. And her mom tells her, yes, one day you'll get married and have a baby and then we can be friends. And she felt very much that she had to do those things in order to get the love and the friendship from her mother. And she had to wait to be loved. In chapter 5, Pioneers, she does talk about not having a temple in Springville where they lived. And she said there was one in Provo that the people would go to Provo, which is a neighboring town of Springville, to go to the temple. And it says it used to look like a wedding cake spaceship, an oval with a spire that resembled a UFO, but they've since added a more conventional red brick building. And for the classic white LDS temple experience, it's an 1.5-hour drive north to the awe-inspiring Salt Lake Temple in Salt Lake City, its tallest central eastern spire crowned by the golden statue of the angel Moroni. I wanted to clarify something in that part because the UFO-looking Provo temple, it has been torn down now, and they are building a new one. So eventually there is going to be a new temple in that spot. The red brick building isn't the one that replaced it. It is another building in Provo that they also made into a temple. That is, to me, one of the prettiest ones because it doesn't look like every other one does. Eventually there will be 2 temples in Provo again, but to get the white temple experience, actually there is one right in Orem, which is right next to Provo, and there is one in Payson, which is about 20-30 minutes south of Provo. So technically you don't have to go all the way to Salt Lake to go to a white temple. In fact, there's also one in Alpine. There's also one in, I think, Saratoga Springs or Lehigh. Then there's one in Draper. There are at least 7 temples I can think of that are the classic white temples within driving distance of Provo, not including the Salt Lake one. You don't actually have to go all the way to Salt Lake to get to the white temple experience. However, that is the temple I was married in. As you can see, I had to move the chair again, but I actually have to go now, so I'm going to finish this video up in a little while. I had to leave for a couple of hours, so I'm back, and so the background again might look different, and I'm just gonna pick up where I left off when I had to stop the video. In the same chapter, she starts talking about her dad, and she says he's not a visionary like Joseph Smith. Immediately, I'm kind of triggered because as an ex-Mormon, I know so much about Joseph Smith that I didn't know when I was a member, and I know he's not a hero. He's not a good man. But to her, he is. And so she's relating her dad to him, where she said there was a stoicism to him, a quiet strength I couldn't help but admire, but he was not a visionary like Joseph Smith. I think as a reader, as an outsider, I see her dad and I don't see any sign of that stoicism or that quiet strength. I see a very weak man that gave in to a lot of things he shouldn't and was not there for his children in the way he should have. If he wasn't involved in the abuse, he was complacent in it. However, the fact that she and Chad both seem to have forgiven their dad and have a relationship with him, they know more of the ins and outs than we do, even from reading the book. So I'm going to have to just assume that they know things I don't know about him. But it definitely is not the dad we see in this book. She goes on right after that to a conversation she had with her dad. And I think she's bringing this up because it was one moment where her mom was proud of her. And it's because Shari asked her dad about tithing. Doesn't God have enough money already, she says, when she asks him why we pay it. He says, it's not about God having enough money, sweetie. Tithing is an ancient principle that goes back thousands of years. We give 1/10 of what we earn back to him as an offering to show our gratitude and obedience. And she says, well, what does the church do with the money? And of course, he gives the answer that you are trained to give, that it is building temples and churches, funding missionary work around the world, which is partly accurate, but a lot of it also goes into investments and stocks, which is something a lot of people don't know. But he then says, but tithing is about more than just giving money. It's a covenant, which means a special promise we make with God. By giving a portion of what we have to him, we show that we trust him to take care of us in return. So she said, so it's like sharing our stuff with God and then he shares his blessings with us. And her dad says, exactly. When we keep our promises to God, he blesses us in ways we can't even imagine. And that very much shows the Mormon transactional relationship with God. We do believe that we pay tithing, we get blessings, and you are so afraid that if you stop paying tithing, you will be punished. Also, that shows how when she says, well, I want to do that then there is this moment of parental pride that she wouldn't have had very often. So I believe that's why she has included that conversation in the book. We also get a little bit more of a look at the mom as they are starting to transition into this more public life. We get the picture of the way she has always been pretty cold with the children, but her discipline is getting even stricter. And she says that she becomes obsessed with West Point, and so she starts enacting military type punishments. You did this wrong, you're going to go run around the block, you're going to do push-ups, things like that, treating her kids more like cadets than children. We come to part 2, Ship of Fools. And that's when she starts talking more about the vlogging as missionary work, that Utah has become this hotbed of family vlogging because it says they have the opportunity to become such powerhouses in the realms of family vlogging and traditional lifestyle content creation, and modern media can be harnessed to share testimonies and values in a relatable, engaging way. She talks about how her mom changes their whole house, paint colors, furnishings, decorations, everything in order for it to be more like a studio because they're going to be filming in every part of their house. One thing that stood out here is she says, "We never chose to be internet celebrities, but that made no difference. Soon our lives now revolved around nonstop content creation, whether we liked it or not." Ruby's sisters and her brother also were vloggers, and some of them were vloggers before Ruby was. And so everybody is filming all of the time in this extended family. "You couldn't sneeze without being immortalized from multiple angles," she wrote. Can you imagine being 12 years old and having every part of your life filmed and shared with the world? I cannot imagine that. When I talked about my journals earlier, I talked about how they are embarrassing to read back because I was so silly sometimes. I have often said that I'm glad that I was not a teenager in the age of social media. And that is one of the reasons, because we don't have to, in my generation, deal with everybody seeing all of our stupid things we did online and having them forever where we can't get rid of them. Her life, she can't take back what everybody saw in her life and her siblings. She says the constant surveillance was excruciating. She also goes more into the details of how these family vloggers work. You watch their content, and most of them are very wealthy, but you also see them going on vacations and buying things, and I think a lot of people incorrectly assume that they are paying for those things themselves, and that is just part of the wealth of being a family vlogger, that they have the money to buy those things. Every time they want to do something, they have to film it. And so it says, Ruby tried to make the whole surreal enterprise seem fun, even beneficial to us. If you film your ice cream outing, you can pay for it with the 8 passengers credit card. Just think, free food and a tax write-off. And when you stop to think about that for a minute, that people are getting tax write-offs to film their children, that they'll go out and pay for ice cream just so they can film it, so people will watch it and they get a tax write-off. It's so ridiculous when you really stop to think about it. She said that if they filmed in the car on the way to the amusement park, even the gas could be written off as a business expense. She starts talking about the brand deals that they would get. A slow cooker company sent us one of their fancy pots and a bunch of meals to cook in it. Our house became a revolving door of brand deals and swag. Clothes, tech, snacks, you name it, we reviewed it. And she put reviewed in quotation marks, which I'm guessing is because they probably weren't really reviewing it that much. They're just filming it. When I first started my blog, when my daughters were very small, it was growing. And I was invited to a big toy expo in Chicago. So we got to go down there as a family. We got to get into this toy fair for free. Doug got to take the girls to go into the big room where they had a bunch of different toy displays, and they got to just play in there. They got to watch things, try things out that hadn't been released yet. And I had to go to a room where they had about 20 of us, and we were given a big spiel on how to blog reviews, how to do it effectively. And then I was given a huge bag full of things to review. And then they also gave us a big Thomas the Train set roller coaster type thing outside of the bag. So then I had to take that out and carry it around. I got all of that for free. I had a free lunch. They got free food. And I had to go home and I did reviews on all of them. I had to do a little write-up of a review. We also got invited to a preview of the movie Tangled in Chicago at a movie theater. Same thing. They gave us a big swag bag with like hair products and all sorts of stuff in them. And we got to watch the movie before it had been released. And then I had to blog about it. And I remember at that time thinking, this is awesome. I'm going to make money. We're getting free stuff. What an easy way to do that as a stay-at-home mom. But as people started getting more and more of those brand deals, I didn't want to spend the time doing it. I had 2 little ones at that point. I was teaching my oldest preschool. We were doing things as a family, and I just didn't put in the time other people did. And so I watched as other blogs kept getting bigger and bigger, and I kind of stopped and made it a small family one again. I doubt that I would have ever gotten to be one of the big ones. But I remember in that moment thinking how fun that was, how exciting it was to be getting free things, to be invited to things. And so I can imagine a small percentage of what that probably felt like to Ruby or to people like her, that they start YouTube and they're filming all of their stuff every day. They're getting a lot of positive feedback. They're getting brand deals. They're getting free vacations. I think it's very easy to see how you could get swept up in that. It says we got to go on lots of all expense paid vacation. How many of us would turn down a free vacation somewhere? It would be very easy to tell yourself that it's okay to be filming your children doing this stuff all day long because of the benefits that you feel like they're getting from it. On the next page, she says, what are the lasting repercussions of growing up on camera without any say in the matter? How does that constant exposure shape a child's sense of self, their future relationships, their very understanding of privacy, and what does consent really look like when you're a child too afraid to say no? I think that is one of the most important points in the whole book, in the whole story. These children, they are not giving consent even if they are. Ruby's sister, Bonnie, made a video in response to the book, and she gets a lot of negative criticism from a lot of people as well, because she has some of the same parenting tactics. She says that they're nothing alike, but you can see some of Ruby in her. I have no idea what she is really like or what their home is really like, but in her video, she talked about how she's told her kids, we can stop anytime. If you guys aren't enjoying this, we won't do it. If you don't want me to film this, tell me. I was watching somebody that was talking about her saying that, and he said, nobody is going to be brave enough to say that to her. And I think that's true. When she says you're too afraid to say no, I would imagine that most family vloggers, their kids act like they're happy, they act like they're enjoying it, they act like they love it, because these kids did too. And they are probably too afraid to say no because they know what will happen. They know how much money their family is making. They know all of these brand deals and free things that their family is getting. They know the consequences of their saying no. This reminded me of in the LDS church when our kids get baptized at 8 years old. We always say, they chose to get baptized. I'm so proud of my child for choosing to get baptized. And we really believe it. I really believed it in the moment. Both of my daughters were baptized at 8 years old, and I really believed they were choosing it. And it was only with a little bit of space looking back that I realized that, yes, we didn't say you have to do this and physically force them into the water as they tried to fight us or anything. But everybody in the ward, all of the kids are in the program. It's great to be 8. They all know they're getting baptized that year. And the kids that are the exact same age as them, turning 8 in the same month, all get baptized on the same day. So there's a lot of kids involved. Your friends are all getting baptized. I've heard of ex-Mormons whose little kids that live here in Utah still want to get baptized because all their friends at school are getting baptized. And so they feel left out. I don't think that it really is a choice for an 8-year-old to get baptized. I don't think it's really a choice for these kids that are on camera to be having their whole life vlogged and put on YouTube. I think that the greater question of consent when you have children is something that should be talked about across the board. As parents, how much pressure are we putting on our kids to do the thing that we think is best for them? Saying that we're giving them a choice, but are we really? So then Shari starts talking about how she decided to start her own channel because she could go get a job at a grocery store to pay for college, or she could have her own channel. She sees how much money her mom's making. She's already on camera all day long, every day. She might as well be making her own money. And so she goes to her mom and tells her mom that. And she says, well, you can shout me out on your channel and tell everybody I'm starting this channel. But Ruby laughed and said, no way, Shari, no shortcuts, no shout outs. You need to get to 100,000 subscribers on your own, just like I did. And then I'll give you a shout out on 8 passengers. Shari, I don't shout out anyone with less than 100,000. You know that. Consider it an incentive for you to treat it like a real business. I'll shout you out once you've built a channel worth promoting. And one of the things that made me think of was not only that that's kind of mean as a mom, but also how many influencers do you see that are friends? Their friend group, they go on girls' trips, they are promoting each other all of the time. This shows us at least one person that I know has been in those groups before, because she used to be in groups with like Jordan Page and I can't remember who else, but a few of the other big Utah LDS people. And it makes you realize these influencers, are they really friends? Some of them probably are, but they are people who can do for each other. They can help each other grow and get more brand deals and get more money and get more visibility, but they are not caring about the people that aren't on the same level than them. And to be like, I'm not going to give anyone a shout out unless they have over 100,000 views. Some of the best channels that I watch are hardly any subscribers, comparatively. And then there's some that have millions that I look at and I have absolutely no interest in their content. I think that that is a viewpoint that probably a lot of people have. You're only worth their time once you get to a certain point. I've seen that with other people saying things like that online as well. And so we definitely can see that Ruby was that way. Her mom also likes to remind her of why what they do is so important. She shows her a message that Ruby got. Watching your family, it's like I finally found a place where I belong. You guys are so happy and loving and above all, honest. It gives me hope that maybe one day I can have that too. I've even started going to church because of you, and I'm thinking about getting baptized in the LDS church. Thank you for showing me the light. I know someone who was in the homeschool community, had a pretty big YouTube channel, and she was a nice person. I met her a couple of times in person, and she was really nice. Their family seemed perfect on YouTube. And I don't know how true that is. Like I said, I only met her a couple of times, and I only met one of her children. I know that there was someone who got baptized because of them. This person reached out to her and said the same kind of thing. I love your family. I wish I had a family like yours. This made me look into the LDS church. I want to know more. And so this person helped this other person to find out more. They got baptized. And so this is something that happens probably pretty regularly. And the interesting thing about this as well is that I have heard of a lot of people and read things about a lot of people that were baptized into the LDS church because of a man named Paul H. Dunn. He was a general authority in the Quorum of the 70. So the Quorum of the 70 is an office in the Melchizedek priesthood that assists in the administration of the church around the world. There are 70 men that are directly under the top 15 men. And he was one of them. And these people sometimes also speak at the General Conference, the conference 2 times a year where they give talks. And he was a speaker about twice a year from October 1964 to April 1973. After that, it slowed down a bit, but he still spoke at least once a year from the 1970s until 1987. He would tell stories about his time in Major League Baseball and his stories of his time in war. He talked about his friend that died in his arms in war. And all of these stories were so well told and so meaningful to so many people that there are a lot of people that were, like I said, were baptized because of him. Well, it turns out all of them were a lie. In fact, the friend that supposedly died in his arms was still alive. And he was found out to have been telling all of these lies. He was given emeritus status, I think that's how you say it, where they basically are let go out of their calling, but it's not like it's taken away from them. They are just released. And he was not excommunicated, which is something that happens to a lot of people when they do something wrong in the LDS church. That could make a video all on its own. It shows how easy it is for people to see something inspiring and immediately believe it and join the church because of it. And to think that people got baptized into the LDS church or looked into it because of this family, because they are happy and loving and honest, all of those 3 things which they are not. And that is one of the biggest problems, I think, with influencer culture. Again, I don't think anyone should be getting online and just talking about bad stuff that's happening all of the time. I don't think that you should put your children's worst moments on camera online. But I also think that there is a detriment to society when people pretend to be perfect all the time. You can say, we're not perfect. We're not a perfect family, without sharing all your dirty laundry. This section starts to show a little bit more of the darkness with this lifestyle for Shari herself, because she is becoming suicidal. She is depressed. She reaches out to her dad through a text and tells him she's depressed. He says, "Thank you for telling me. We're going to get through this together," which was a great response. I will give Kevin that great response. He then shares a link to an inspiring church talk for her. That makes sense. That is a very LDS thing to do. But again, he let her know that he cared. He didn't just send her the talk. He also thanked her for telling him. I think he handled that correctly. Her mom thinks it's stupid. She says, "You don't need help. You're fine." She says all problems can be solved with prayer, diet, and exercise. Shari goes to her bishop, who is the leader of their congregation, their ward at church. And luckily, this man sounds like he was a good bishop. And he tells her that he believes that she has scrupulosity. Scrupulosity is also known as religious OCD. They're constantly worried about their purity and whether they're doing something wrong, whether they're doing right things. This is something that I dealt with as well as a Mormon. I never felt like I was good enough and doing enough. And she definitely has that to an even more extreme. And thankfully, this bishop notices that, and he thinks that she needs to have some therapy. So during this time where we know that Shari is dealing with depression and self-consciousness and scrupulosity, her mom goes so far as to one day tell her that she wants to do her eyebrows. So she tells Shari, "It'll be a great video for the channel. I'll give you $100. And so Shari says, "Okay, you can wax my eyebrows." She says, "Ruby waxed off half my left eyebrow, leaving a sharp 90-degree angle that made me look like I was perpetually shocked by my own reflection." She says she doesn't even remember getting the $100, but the YouTube video, the thumbnail, was a picture of Shari in the middle of crying with a big title of "Shari, I'm so sorry." So she uses the most embarrassing moments during a time when she knows her daughter is depressed to get views. They also find out that she was dating a boy that she hadn't talked to them about, and they decide that they're going to take her out of school and send her to a different school. Ruby says, "You'll like your new school better. The classes are much smaller, the teachers are excellent, and everyone there will be of our faith. It'll be a much safer environment for her." During a time when they know that Shari is going through so much, they take her out of a school where she is enjoying it. She doesn't seem to love it, but she doesn't want to change schools. And they're going to do this and send her to American Heritage School. They don't name it in the book, but I do know that that's the school that she went to. American Heritage is a private LDS school. I actually looked at sending my daughters there. So when we moved back to Utah, I thought it would be awesome to have my daughter in a private school that seemed to be really conservative and patriotic and LDS, and every other kid there would be LDS, and the teachers would be, and it would just, in my mind, I just thought this would be a great experience for her. And I looked it up, and she would have been in elementary school at the time, and I don't remember what the price was, but it was about this, because I remember thinking it was like sending her to college. But right now, if you sent somebody there in grades 1 through 5, it would be $10,347 a year. 6th to 8th grade is a little bit more than that. 9th to 12th grade, which would be where Shari was, would be $12,691. So this is a very expensive move. They are spending a lot of money to move Shari to a school that she doesn't even want to go to. And I didn't send my daughter there. We saw the prices and realized very quickly we couldn't afford that. Shari does get into therapy, and she goes and talks, but she has a hard time telling the woman exactly how she feels. But one day she finally tells the lady that she doesn't enjoy playing the piano. It gives her a lot of anxiety. The therapist calls in Ruby and tells her, "Why don't you tell her what you just said to me?" And so Shari tells her, and Ruby tells her, "Okay, that's fine. You don't have to play the piano again." She felt like there would probably be a consequence, and there is. So later on, Ruby tells her, when she sees Shari eating dinner before going to therapy, "Oh, you don't have to hurry. We're not going to therapy anymore." And she basically tells Shari that the doctor has said that she just has an active imagination. And Shari says that she would like to keep going to therapy. Ruby says, "Listen to me, Shari. The doctor thinks you're a very well-adjusted girl with, how do I put it, an active imagination." Shari says, "Wait, she thinks I'm making this up? Mommy's little drama queen is always looking for attention." That's one of those moments you have to pause, and you know that that therapist did not say that. We all know that. We don't have to be there to know she didn't say that. But to think that as a mom, you could have a daughter, a teenager that you know is depressed, has suicidal thoughts, and you put out a really embarrassing moment publicly. You take her out of the school and put her in a school she doesn't want to go to. You make her stop going to therapy and tell her that the therapist said that she is a drama queen. This shows us what kind of mom Ruby Franke was before Jodi Hildebrandt ever came into the picture. In the next chapter, Shari shares with us that she is finally getting more successful with her YouTube channel. And so Ruby is going to now have a mom tax and take 10% off the top for herself, even though she doesn't help her with it and didn't even help her get successful with it. She also starts talking about how Chad is a little bit different, whereas Shari is always trying to people please and keep everyone happy and have her parents proud of her. Chad, he's more of a jokester. He plays pranks. He's not serious the way she is. She said that Chad was more like a shaken up bottle of Mentos and Coke, incapable of restraint, like a force of nature. I had to change backgrounds again. I picked a really bad time for filming today, both times, because the light coming through my windows is just trying to destroy me. As we're getting this bigger picture of Chad being more to handle than Shari, we get into the next part, part 3, the conjurer. They are given the name of a therapist that will do wonders, will apparently be great for Chad. And this is where we finally meet Jodi Hildebrandt. A licensed clinical mental health counselor, Jodi had built a reputation in Utah's LDS community as something of a miracle worker. One thing to point out here is that why does she have a great reputation in the LDS community? It's not just because she's LDS. It's because she is one of the people that if you went to a bishop and you needed therapy, she would be recommended. She was on a list for bishops to recommend. And I do think that's important because she doesn't mention that here. There are a lot of people that were sent to Jodi, and she has ruined more lives than just the Frankes. In this first chapter of this part, she tells a story of how they went to Orlando on a family trip, And Chad is acting up on this trip. Honestly, he's just acting like any other teenage boy his age. But because of Ruby and how strict she is and how perfect everything has to be for the camera all the time, that is the worst thing he could possibly do. And so they start talking to Jodi about Chad, and she says she had some other ideas for his immediate rehabilitation, including sending him away to Anasazi, a wilderness therapy program in Arizona for troubled teens. Jodi painted Anasazi as a transformative experience, a place where Chad could shed his rebellious ways and emerge as the obedient, spiritually aligned son my parents craved. It sounded like a miracle cure-all, promising to fix every conceivable teenage problem with a bit of fresh air and wilderness survival skills. Never mind the eye-watering price tag of $13,945 for just 49 days of treatment. But my parents, flush with YouTube money and blinded by desperation, didn't even blink at the cost. They were too entranced by Jodi's promises and too eager for a quick fix to question whether this was really in Chad's best interest. And she talks about Ruby's excitement for him to go there. It's like the real wilderness out there, she told the viewers. There are snakes, bears, coyotes, cougars. It's the real deal. We want Chad to have some of those experiences. I think Close Encounters would be good for him because those types of experiences can teach you what's really important. And he'll come home and he'll be like, dude, I survived and there were bears. I can do anything. This is another one of those moments where this book is meaningful and their story is meaningful because we have a connection to it. My husband, Doug, was sent to that exact same camp, to Anasazi, and he was there for 70 days, so even longer than Chad was. And he was 14 years old. He basically was given, I think he said he had a blue tarp, a canteen for water, he ate lizards. He would have to catch them and kill them himself to eat. And he slept on the ground out in the desert. Sometimes he would lay on the tarp. Sometimes he would put it above himself if it was raining. And there were a group of kids, but they were hardly ever together. So he was almost always by himself for that entire 70 days. In my husband's case, it's very similar to Chad. He was there for no reason. He didn't like school. And he was feeling a little depressed. And so his parents took him to the bishop. They recommended a therapist. Thankfully, it wasn't Jodi, but it was someone else who said, hey, do you like camping? And Doug said, I think I would. And they sent him off to Anasazi. Doug was expecting it to be like a camp, like in Parent Trap, when you go off to that camp. Like that was what was in his mind. And it was, of course, very different. I asked him if those animals that she said were there, if that was really true, because I knew he'd seen lizards, obviously, and rattlesnakes. And he said he did see a cougar once. This was not a very safe thing. This also is something that is very LDS based. A lot of LDS families do this. She said that when Chad returned from Anasazi, he talked about his time in the wilderness like it was no big deal. And Doug was that way too. He had a really positive attitude about it. I think it did build some confidence in himself. It wasn't until this last year when this came out that Chad had been there, but also there's a few other people in the LDS community that have come out talking about Anasazi in particular, and a few of the other wilderness camps that are like it. And the way everybody talks about it and how they're not really that good for most kids, it's brought up memories in him that have made him feel really negatively toward it, and understanding how weird it was that he was sent to something like that for the reason that he was. He doesn't have the same positive memory of it anymore. I think that those kind of camps can be positive for children that are into drugs and really destructive behaviors. But for anything else, I think it is way too extreme. Unless there's a kid that is very outdoorsy and would love living out in the desert like that for a couple of months, and you just want to help them to center themselves, I could see it in that case too. But sending out kids that just are normal kids that are dealing with normal emotions and sending them out for months to live in the desert, it just doesn't make sense. So as she's talking about this, she does bring up, she Googled Jodi, and she found, it says, for instance, in 2012, a young man moved to Utah with his new wife and baby to attend Brigham Young University. His bishop recommended he see Jodi for therapy. See, that was one of the people on the list. This turned out to be a terrible mistake. Without any proof, Jodi accused her client of being an abuser and violated patient confidentiality by reporting him to BYU's Honor Code office as a sexual predator. She also reported him to the church. The fallout was brutal. The man was kicked out of BYU and the church. His marriage fell apart, the very thing he'd gone to Jodi for help with. This man was a man named Adam Steed. He also has a background with having been abused in the Boy Scouts by an LDS leader in his church. And so he already had trauma And that was one of the main reasons he went to a therapist, was the trauma that he had from his childhood. This man has been through so much. And then what she did to him, it's heartbreaking. If you can find his story online, it's worth listening to. It's so sad. Shari does have some questions about Jodi. And when she goes to chat about it, he says, if I don't do therapy with her, Mom's going to make my life even worse than it already is. But then he went and told Ruby that Shari had said all of this. So now Shari has to start going to Jodi as well. She starts having Zoom calls with her. When she tells her mom that Jodi's own kids don't speak to her, Ruby says her kids couldn't handle the truth. She's been called by God to help people. In the next couple of chapters, she talks about the MO of Jodi and how she likes to isolate people. She wants them to be isolated. She wants them to be controlled. And she also goes into the things that Jodi would do in her groups, where a woman could be accused of cheating if she just thought her mailman was attractive. If a man talked with a female coworker at work, he could be an adulterer. And they would isolate the husbands. She did that over and over and over again. You can find so many of these stories where she isolated husbands. Connexions language framed it as inviting him to leave. Code for, I'm going to make you isolate yourself from everyone you know except for Jodi. This is a very Mormon term. You'll see that in this book. If you know what to look for, you see a lot of them. Inviting somebody is something that Mormons use a lot. I invite you to do this thing. And that is a language that Jodi and then Ruby use all the time. When they want you to do something, but they want you to believe that it's your own choice, then they will invite you to do it. They also take away Chad's sports. He is an athlete, and they decide that that is something he shouldn't have. So they take him out of sports, even though that is what he is really talented at and what he loves. And he probably had a future at it. Whenever Ruby is having conversations with Shari in this book, you start to see how Ruby always is telling Shari that she's things that Ruby is herself. Shari, you don't have empathy. You're not compassionate. These are all things that Ruby was not. But Shari is being told constantly that those are things that she is lacking. And when she starts going to Jodi tells her that she thinks too much of herself. She has to write down all the times that she feels smug or congratulates herself about something or feels prideful about something. And then Jodi tells her, okay, now I want you to turn it around. So when she is thinking that she's going to ace a test, she says, flip it and think this to yourself. Oh my gosh, I'm going to fail this test because I'm a very stupid little girl. And again, this goes back to what kind of parent, what kind of therapist tells a girl that has already had depression issues to tell yourself that you're stupid. And to constantly, every time you start to feel good about yourself, tell yourself something horrible about yourself. That is what Shari was going through. Ruby is yelling less and has become less abusive in those ways, but the abuse becomes more psychological in nature now. And of course, we know that later it will be physical, but it started out a little bit more psychological. So at first, it seemed like maybe Jodi was helping Ruby. Shari starts to get swept up in it and starts to believe in Jodi as well. And then one day, Jodi is telling her that you shouldn't help a baby when it cries. And Shari says, but they're just babies, Jodi. They can't help it if they need things. And Jodi says, no, a baby cries because it's entitled. She basically is saying that every baby is already manipulating you. And that is when Shari realizes, who is this person? She starts to really see her clearly again, which is a good thing because that is what helps Shari to get where she needs to be, away from the family later. However, we all know that people that are abused tend to put themselves in situations that aren't healthy because they don't necessarily understand a healthy relationship. And we can read from this book that Shari does not understand a healthy relationship. She doesn't know what it feels like to be loved unconditionally. Someone new enters her life that will pretend to be a confidant and someone that really cares about her and listens to her, but is also out for selfish gains. And this is a man named Derek. So we learn about him on page 146 for the first time. Derek was high up in the church, a family man and landowner in his late 40s. In May 2021, right after I graduated high school, he asked for my help with social media strategy for his company, offering me a side gig to help him put together videos for YouTube. So she had just turned 18, and this man in his late 40s has asked her to come and work for him. What she doesn't tell us is what the high up in the church means. I don't know what that means, if that means he was a bishop or a stake president. I don't believe so. He definitely wasn't hers, but he could be something like that or even higher. I don't know. We know he has a high calling in the church, and we know that his age and that he was married. She also doesn't say how she met him. So I don't know if this is somebody that she met through family connections, neighborhood, or what. Like, she does not give that away. I think because she's keeping him anonymous. I don't believe Derek is his real name. And maybe if she said how she met him, we would all be able to tell who he is. He is somebody who we're going to talk about again in a second, but he has now hired her. Then we go into part 4, mankind beset by devils. Jodi is now all of a sudden, she's not well. And Ruby says to them that Jodi is going to be moving in with them. She says she's not well. She's being bombarded by the adversary. Her soul is under siege from Satan himself. Shari, he's trying to silence her truth. So she's moving in with us. We're going to help her get better. So they're going to give her Shari's room. This is another place where you see the Mormonisms, the words that we use over and over and over again. A lot of Mormons won't say Satan, they'll say adversary. They won't say God, they'll say Heavenly Father. They won't say Jesus as often, they'll say Savior almost every single time. If they say gospel, they don't mean the gospel of Jesus Christ from the Bible, they mean the gospel of Jesus Christ is the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. You'll pick up on Mormon buzzwords, and it's good to know them because then you know what they're talking about. You'll start to see that throughout the book, and then you start to see it from other people that you follow as well, if you know those buzzwords. Jodi had been living with somebody else in a different town, the town next to Springville. And this person in particular, they decided that they were going to leave Connexions, which is Jodi's company, and so they decided that she was in league with Satan. And so now Jodi's going to be with them instead. And she says that mom says that as if she were discussing someone who'd committed a social faux pas rather than join forces with the ruler of hell. This part is sad because that is actually a very normal viewpoint if people leave the church as well. If you leave the church, then you are now in league with Satan. You're following the devil. And so they're taking that belief and applying it to their own little cult of Connexions as well. Jodi's now living with them. She says that her dad seems like a shell of his former self. She kept waiting for him to intervene and to help, and she said he never even tried. This is the next section that I'm going to talk about a little bit more in detail for a minute. She says that Ruby and Jodi and another woman that worked with them, Pam, would go to Mexico and get medication, lots of pills. And it was like doomsday prepping. They wanted to have all these pills for the apocalypse. And she says, like many doomsday preppers in the LDS Church, they were obsessed with a book called Visions of Glory. Published in 2012, this book was not endorsed by the mainstream LDS Church, but a lot of LDS people follow it. This is an interesting thing because a lot of people speculated that maybe they had something to do with this book and with Tom Harrison, the man that this book comes from. But it wasn't a 100% sure thing until she mentioned it in this book. It is true that the LDS Church has never endorsed the book Visions of Glory. However, it has not been denounced either. And this man that wrote it, it was like a man was interviewing somebody named Spencer. And Spencer is telling the story of all these visions he has of the end of the world and the afterlife. And it was told with near-death experiences that he saw these things. Well, a man named Tom Harrison has come out and he is Spencer. So we know that now. Tom Harrison is trained in cognitive therapy, psychodynamic therapy, reality-oriented therapy, and relationship therapy. He had a practicing Utah clinical license since 1977. He taught at the University of Utah Medical School and at the Graduate School of Social Work and in conflict resolution and divorce mediation at BYU Law School. He's counseled over 4,000 survivors of sexual abuse. He treats dissociative disorders and has served on the neurotrauma team at 3 hospitals. He used to give firesides for LDS people. So this is somebody who seems to be a very experienced therapist here in Utah. He was also on the short list of therapists for LDS Church. Apparently at some point asked not to do the firesides on this book anymore and to not talk about it as if it was fact, but he was not excommunicated. And in fact, after this book was published, he was made a bishop. He also worked for the church in mental health. When a missionary had any kind of mental health concerns, he was one of the people that would decide whether they were healthy enough to go on a mission. And when you get into his book and you find out the kinds of things that are in it, this is not somebody who should be in charge of the mental health of missionaries. He had a relationship with Neil A. Maxwell, who was an apostle of the church who is now passed. And he said that he shared these visions with Neil A. Maxwell, and that Maxwell told him that they were from God, that he should write them down, but he shouldn't share them unless God told him to. And then later on, he had a vision telling him that it was time to share it. And he felt that Maxwell had sent that vision because he was dead. In the near-death experiences, he talks about how there's spirits and demons all around us, and that he could tell immediately if somebody was good or evil by looking at them. And he could know the things that they were doing or not doing. He talks about inanimate objects talking to him and all sorts of really disturbing things. He talks about how you can be possessed by demons if you even sin in the smallest bit. If you have a bad thought, if you are depressed, you could have a rip in your soul that a demon could come through, and he watched it happen in these visions. And so if you are weak or you sin, you lose consent, about not having the demons possess you. He talks about seer stones, which if you've watched any of my other videos, you know that Joseph Smith used a seer stone to translate the Book of Mormon. He talks about us communicating through them in the future and the temple being lit with seer stones. He's talked about how some sins can't be forgiven without death, which is something that Brigham Young taught with his blood atonement. There's a story of a man in Brigham Young's time that was caught in adultery, and they dug a grave for him, and he just got down in it because he wanted them to kill him. He knew that was the only way he'd be forgiven, because Brigham Young taught that there were some sins that could not be forgiven without death or blood spill. He talked about a time in one of his visions where it was the end of the world, and these groups of people were coming in. If people wanted to come and destroy them, that they could tell by looking at them if it was somebody who had some good in them, or if this was somebody who would never repent. And it says that we could deliver them, start them on their immortality journey, and death would be a blessing to them. One of the reasons that you need to know this and know how dangerous this person is if you know anything about Chad Daybell and Lori Vallow. This was a story a couple of years ago about these people that spouses died, and then Lori's children were killed. And these people followed Tom Harrison's teachings. They read visions of glory. They believed in his visions so much. And when you know that, you can see their beliefs of the reason that those children were killed, that they had demons, that they had become zombies, in their words. You can see that coming back to the things in his book. He did an Eternal Core conference a while back. There was Tom Harrison, Jodi Hildebrandt, and Tim Ballard. And Tim Ballard, one of his victim statements in the lawsuit against Tim Ballard, she said that he would tell them about the book, that he met Tom Harrison. Tom Harrison told Tim Ballard that he was going to be a prophet of the LDS Church and president of the United States someday. And all of these things validate Jodi's teachings, the things that she was teaching people about themselves and children, and how the demons could take over these kids in their sin. And the scary thing about this, not only because of the Daybells reading this book and Tim Ballard apparently loving this book, is that I looked up the book and I was reading reviews that people have left on it. And these are a couple of the ones I saw. This book relates a man's first-person account of several personal and amazing experiences that came as a result of numerous close calls with death. They gave a certain perspective on events leading into the final years up until the Second Coming, as well as fascinating details on the nature of spiritual communication, the role of departed family, the true nature of how to prepare for Zion, and many other things. Having read this book myself completely, I can say that I was thoroughly blown away, and it gave me so much to ponder and seek for myself. I can tell you that if you take the opportunity to check this out and use it to absorb more info that the Spirit may teach you, you will not be disappointed in this work. Another reviewer said, "This book was one of the most powerful books I've ever read. It goes hand in hand with everything I've ever known. There are a couple points that are a bit out there, but the more you think about it, the more even these make perfect sense." And you can find a lot of LDS prepper sites where the people love this book and they all talk about it and believe it's scripture. That's why I bring up that while the church doesn't endorse this book, they need to denounce it. They know that there is a problem with people in their church that believe in visions of glory, and that it needs to be denounced the same way that it denounced Tim Ballard. They made a whole public statement about him, publicly excommunicating him, but they have never done that with this book. And in fact, they've never done it with any of these people besides Tim Ballard. That needs to happen. So that is just one little paragraph sentence that when I was reading it, I thought, to most people, they would just read that and move on, and they wouldn't understand what visions of glory actually was. So now they're telling Kevin that he can leave the house whenever he wants, but to come back, he has to have Ruby's permission. And she does go into some of the things that she starts to see in her room when she goes in there once when everybody's gone, and seeing her mom come out of the room at night, starting to hint at maybe there being a physical relationship between Jodi and Ruby. They seem to be having a more intimate relationship. And now she goes back to Derek, the older man, and she talks about how he invites her over one day. She goes over and she starts having a panic attack, and he tells her that he can help her, but she needs to have skin-to-skin contact. That will help her. She says, "I shook my head. I tried to push him away, but he was stronger than me. Trust me," he said. "Let me help you." He assaults her here. She does seem to try to push back a little bit, but she doesn't do a full-on fighting back, which is totally understandable. You know that she would go into freeze mode. She probably was so confused, and she also, again, has never been taught to stick up for herself. She said, "In my mind, my frozeness, my inability to move was a sign from God, a punishment for my transgression." So she believes in this situation that she has sinned because this older man has taken advantage of her. That continues to happen. She continues to work for him, and he continues to take advantage of this relationship with her. Eventually, Ruby and Jodi are sharing a room, and the dad is alone in their marital bedroom, she says. You can see how he is being pushed out further and further away from Ruby. Every time that Shari tries to talk to them about anything, her mom will use a threat against her. "How would anyone want to marry a girl like you?" So she is constantly having her self-esteem tore down being told that she's unmarriageable, which is, considered the one goal of life for most LDS girls. She is just ripe for this man to take advantage of her. In chapter 30, we get a really sad story, in my opinion. This is that the youngest siblings are not given Christmas. The mom announces, your youngest siblings won't be receiving any presents this year. Ruby and Jodi say that children are not entitled to a magical childhood. You can't just expect love and presents. Many have nothing at all. And while that is a true sentiment, you can't expect presents. Little kids might not have a magical Christmas every year of their life. If all of your other siblings are getting it and you're not, that is cruel. That's not just a normal punishment. I think that is so cruel. And so that is what happened. These little kids, and these are the ones that ended up being tortured later, they have to watch as the rest of their family open presents and enjoy Christmas, and these little children do not get anything and don't get to have any fun. She said that Derek started turning into Big Brother. He's tracking her phone. He knows where she is at all times. And when she started to feel bad about that, she said, he's the only protection I have. I repeated it like a mantra, even as a part of me screamed that this protection came with a terrible price. But without him, she would be really alone. She goes to him and tells him, I don't think this is right, what we're doing. I shouldn't be here. Not like this. What if someone finds out? It would be terrible for everyone. And he says, Shari, you worry too much. In God's eyes, we're not doing anything wrong, and that's all that matters. Remember, this is a man in his 40s. She is barely 18. And he is married. She said, how can you be so sure? And he says, Shari, I'm an elder in the Melchizedek priesthood. I'm responsible for the spiritual and temporal well-being of the men in my quorum. Do you really think I would do anything to jeopardize my calling? It was true. He was a man of God, a worthy member. When I was reading this, all I could think of is earlier in this book and then later in this book when she talks about Joseph Smith as if he's a hero. This is probably exactly what the young girls that Joseph Smith coerced into marrying him felt like. He's saying, I'm a man of God. Look at my calling. Look how high I am. I am a prophet. Of course this is right, no matter how bad you feel. That made me sick to my stomach reading that, not only for Shari, but also thinking about how many men have used their place in the church to hurt girls or anybody, to hurt anybody. She finally tells her mom, Mom, I feel like you don't care about me. And her mom gives her back the most cold response. She doesn't care. It's all back on Shari. I feel like you're being aggressive. You are angry. All of these different things. Every time she's having negative thoughts, it's always turned on her. She says, what irony. While all this was happening, I was studying abuse of power in my college classes, learning about the dynamics of coercion, about the ways in which abusers groom and manipulate their victims. But even as I intellectualized these concepts, even as I wrote papers and participated in discussions about the insidious nature of abuse, I was unable to apply that knowledge to my own life. My brain wouldn't let me go there. But deep down, I think I knew what Derek was. He was just another one of them, just like Ruby and Jodi. He was yet another one of the poisonous adults in my life, sucking the very marrow from my bones. This also made me think that even while she's writing about this cult and what these people were doing, and about these people in the church taking advantage of her, she still doesn't see that the Mormon church is like this as well. A lot of people are like that. They can be studying cults and they don't see it in their own cult. We all have that part of our brain that doesn't allow us to see the truth when it's right in front of us because we don't want it to be truth. She starts talking to her new bishop at college and talking to him about some of the things that she's going through. And thankfully, she has another good bishop. And he tells her, I think you're depressed. I think you need to see therapy. She says, well, I've tried that before. I can't do it. My parents don't want me to do it. And he says the church will pay for it. And I'm going to give the church props. The LDS church did pay for her therapy. Of course, it's this bishop ordering it. And I'm sure she went to a church therapist again, probably. But I think that it's great that they did pay for that and that she could get that and that he helped her do that. The problem with the church therapist is thankfully she got a good one. And I am so grateful that she was able to find a good one because as we know with the fact that Jodi and Tom Harrison are on this list, sometimes the church therapists are not good. We had an experience in our family with a church therapist at BYU. And this person was not bad, but the problem was made worse from them. And so I know that it can be really encouraging to think, oh, my church is going to take care of this. We're going to go to this person. But it isn't always the best situation. She then finds out from her dad that he has been invited to leave the home. So now he won't even be living in the home anymore. He's not allowed to contact his children or Ruby. And he tells Shari, you cannot contact me or Chad. We're leaving and you don't need to contact us. If we want to talk to you, we'll contact you. He is a professor at BYU at this point still. And she would see him on campus and he wouldn't even talk to her. She would see him and he would look panicked. And that is why I get mad when I think about her dad, because can you imagine seeing your daughter at college and just pretending like she didn't exist? She finally tracks down Chad, and he won't really talk to her either. And then the mom sends her a letter telling her that she's been deceiving her for quite some time because she finds out about her tracking down Chad, and gives her a whole text or email about how horrible Shari is, and says, you don't even know where the enemy is. Your arrogance has kept you from heeding my warnings. So now she doesn't have any contact with anyone in her family anymore. Shari is at BYU and she is alone. She has one person that seems to be looking out for her, the bishop, who is sending her to a good therapist. And she has Derek, who is obviously using her and abusing her. And she thinks he's the only person on her side. She calls the Division of Child and Family Services. They go and do a welfare check and they don't find anything. So, of course, they don't do anything. That makes Ruby double down even harder on the fact that Shari is horrible. Later on, she would call them again. And again, nothing was done. This is something you'll actually see people talk about sometimes, that Utah really needs some help when it comes to taking care of children that are maybe in abusive situations. She goes to visit her aunt and she confesses to her aunt about Derek. And he even shows up. He tracks her on her phone to her aunt's house to bring her some gifts for her birthday. She confesses to her roommate and she finally tells someone else about this man. Her roommate says, I don't know who this man is, but he sounds like a demon. And she says, but I was complicit. I didn't stop it. I'm going to confess everything to my bishop. Her friend says, no, Shari, because she's afraid she'll get her temple recommend taken away. A temple recommend is the document that certifies you're worthy to enter and participate in temple ceremonies. If you engage in serious sin, though, it can be revoked. It would be a source of great shame to me if that happened. It would distance me from God. It was the worst case scenario. You can see right from what she said, it would distance her from God. When you're Mormon, you believe that that little piece of paper is your connection to God, and that someone else can tell you you're worthy of it or not. And so she does. She goes to the bishop. Again, like I said, he seemed to be a nice guy, and he says the right thing. He says, Shari, I want you to listen to me very carefully. You were put in a situation no young person should have to face. That was right. And he doesn't think he's going to do anything to her, but then he has to leave it up to the stake president, who is the one in charge of the stake, which is a group of wards. So the stake president is above the bishop. After talking to the stake president, he gets back to her. He reminded me that we do have a responsibility to ensure that our members are living in accordance with God's laws. He thinks it's best if you take a break from the temple for a bit and hold off on taking the sacrament for a little while we investigate. I'm sorry, Shari. So she loses her temple recommend, and she also is not allowed to take the sacrament every Sunday in church. Those are two huge things that make you feel very unworthy. So now she's being told how horrible she is from her family and Jodi. She's doing this thing that she feels is wrong from Derek, but he's telling her it's right. She finally confesses it, and she is told that she's not worthy to have a connection with God. And Derek received no disciplinary action at all. He told his bishop it wasn't true, and so they believed him. However, if they really believed him that nothing really happened, it seems like that they should have come back to her and said, oh, well, you don't have to have it taken away if it didn't really happen. In the end, I decided to change my ward, to start fresh with a new bishop and a new community. It would mean worshiping with a different congregation, but that was okay. My Heavenly Father knew the depths of my heart and the strength of my spirit, and from now on, in Him alone, I would place my trust and no one else. And I hope that that's really true, because I think if that's true, then she will find her way out of the Mormon church eventually. She goes in a little bit more into details about Connexions and how Ruby has now joined Jodi. She has given up her YouTube channel. She's put it out on the back burner, and she has now joined Jodi in Connexions, teaching other people how to be parents. And I watched a video from that as well. I remember seeing it, hearing that she had done that, and so I watched one of them, and it was one of the creepiest things I've ever seen. And then a man that I used to watch when I was still Mormon, I watched a YouTube channel called Quick Media. This was a Mormon guy that talks politics and different things. And he had the two of them on his show. I listened to the whole thing. I was so creeped out by them. I was like, these people give off so many red flags. And I noticed in the comments that people were saying that. People were saying, hey, you should have checked into them. This is a really bad situation. These people are not good. They are abusive to children. And he deleted comments and he talked about how horrible they were. Of course, once it happened, he erased that whole interview, and that made me lose respect for him. Definitely a weird situation. You could see that there was things that were wrong with these people and with the way that they looked at parenting. She said that shortly after moving into a new apartment, she was with her roommates watching the documentary Sins of Our Mother. It was about Lori Vallow and Chad Daybell that I talked about earlier. And she can see the familiar things about their situation. Their intense belief in the second coming and their obsession with Tom Harrison's visions of glory. She thought to herself, if we don't do something soon, my siblings are going to die. And there are a lot of people who have said that if they hadn't caught them when they did, that they probably would have been just like Lori Vallow's children, and they would have not made it. Now, finally, that gets found out. In chapter 43, The House of My Mother, we go back to where we started with the introduction. She talks about how she takes a few things from the home because she wants to look through the notes and things on the computer. She starts reading all of these emails between the two of them, and she says that it confirmed to her the intimate relationship that Jodi and Ruby had. Kevin, her dad, this is another thing that bothers me about him. He was so angry with her for taking the computers that he actually called the police about it. So she returned them to him. But the fact that he called her out on it, she says that he was still just brainwashed at that point. And I guess, like I said, we have to take her word for it. She talks about what her mom is saying from jail. And her mom says, I mean, it is just horrendous. But you know what? Like Joseph Smith, every wonderful man of God has been misunderstood. I'm going to get out of this. Who knows? Maybe in 10 days I'll get out of this. And again, that's what I was talking about where I said, later on, they would talk about Joseph Smith as if he's a hero. That is how he felt too. He was doing wrong things and he believed he wasn't. Other people look at the things he did and they can justify it because of who he was. Ruby and Jodi were doing the same thing. They had to have known on some level that what they were doing wasn't okay, but they believed that they were called of God to do it, and so it became okay. Ruby's guilty plea was to 4 counts of aggravated child abuse with consecutive sentencing, and that means a maximum of 30 years under Utah law, but could be as little as 4, which is just ridiculous. So another thing that Ruby said from jail, I was reading in Doctrine and Covenants, Christ had a bitter cup he didn't want to drink, but he did because that was his mission. I'm drinking my bitter cup now. There she was again, Ruby, fallen family vlogger, comparing herself to Christ on the cross. The Doctrine and Covenants are a book of scripture in the Mormon church. They are all the revelations that Joseph Smith received. So they're considered modern scripture. Once again, we see that she obviously thought she was okay and that she didn't do anything wrong. But then, of course, at the hearing, she then gets up and thanks everyone. And I remember thinking, what are you, winning an award? And she said in here, it sounded like a Grammy acceptance speech. She thanks everyone there, and then she refers to her children as her 6 little chicks and how much she loved them. And I was glad that Shari talked about that in here because that was something that really stuck out to me as just gross when I watched the hearing. Jodi compared herself also to Joseph Smith and called herself God's messenger behind bars, didn't offer an apology. And I agree. I actually think that they are more like Joseph Smith than Mormons would think they are because they have done something wrong. They believe that they haven't. And the LDS Church says it offers no apologies. So why would they if they think that they have not done anything wrong? In chapter 48, she says, in a way, we represented the first true damning proof of how badly things can go wrong in a social media driven world where kids are content and content is king. I think that one of the most important lessons from all of this is that we look at who we follow. Are there children popping up occasionally for fun? And it's obviously something the kid wants to do. Are they on the background while the person is talking but they're not the focus of the channel? Or are the children the content? If they are, we should stop giving them our viewership. So as people started talking about this and as this has started coming out, Shari felt like she needed to tell her own story. They have not had any control over what was seen of them their whole childhood. Their mom got to choose what people saw. And so she and Chad, they want to be able to tell their story. She wrote this book, and Shari and Chad and the dad, Kevin, are going to be on a documentary. It is a 3-part series called Devil in the Family, The Fall of Ruby Franke. It's going to be on Hulu on February 27th. And I will for sure be watching that to see what they expound upon and what they say, because I do think it's important to let her, through this book, and let Chad, through that documentary, tell their own story and be able to, for once, be in control of how the world is seeing them. One of the sad things to me here at the very end is when she says that she did consult with her bishop about the possibility of encountering Ruby in the celestial afterlife, should she make it there somehow. He assured me I'm under no obligation to acknowledge or engage with her whatsoever. Small mercies indeed. I think that view of the afterlife is so sad that bishop can tell her what she can expect, that she would feel like she has to go to the bishop for that. But that is Mormon life. We have people in between us and God at all times. And we have to get their approval. We have to get their permission. We have to have them tell us that we're worthy. And so it doesn't surprise me that she would have to have the bishop tell her that it was okay for her not to acknowledge her mom if they somehow both end up in heaven. Also, she did find out later that Derek was finally brought before a formal disciplinary council in his church. And I don't know if he confessed or if they just decided that he that Shari was telling the truth about what he did to her, he wasn't excommunicated. It doesn't even sound like he was as strongly disciplined as she was with the temple recommend. She said that his calling was stripped away. Small victory, but not enough, she says. And I agree with her. That's not enough. If she had to stop taking the sacrament and she couldn't go to the temple any longer, I don't understand why he wouldn't have those same consequences. That was a lot. I know. If you're still around, I hope that you found that interesting. Again, I talked about so much, but I also didn't talk about a lot of it. I highly recommend this book. It may seem weird to have been bringing up a lot of other things off the side with this, but I feel like they all have to do with this story. This is a very Mormon story. Not every Mormon family obviously is going to go through this, but there are so many Mormon influencers, and I would bet that there are more than we know that are going through this exact same thing. And in the next 10 to 15 years, we are probably going to get so many stories like this from children of influencers. I think that one of the most important things to get out of this book is that we all need to really look at what we are consuming. Are there children suffering because we enjoy watching this kind of content? And use our viewership and our subscriptions and our likes to try to make a difference in the world, to try to make a difference in social media, to make it so that children can have a normal childhood when they're living in this modern world. I would love to know if you've read this book, if you're planning on reading this book. I don't know if I will talk about the documentary or not when it comes out, but I definitely will be watching it. Again, if you're still here, thank you for taking the time to listen to this discussion and review.